I woke up in a hospital bed, unable to move my own hands, only to hear my son discussing my death like it was a pending business transaction. "Pull the plug," his wife whispered. "We need the insurance money for the renovation before the market crashes." They thought I was a vegetable. They thought the old man was finally out of the way. But they did not know I had just opened my eyes. And by the time they realized I was gone from that room, I had already sold the ground beneath their feet. My name is Reginald King, and this is how I taught my ungrateful family that you never ever bury a king before he is dead. Before I continue this story, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who underestimated your worth. Darkness. That was the first thing. A heavy, suffocating darkness that smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. I tried to lift my eyelids, but they felt like they were weighted down with lead. I tried to move my fingers to clench a fist, but the signals from my brain seemed to die somewhere in my shoulders. Was I dead? No. The rhythmic beeping of a machine told me I was still tethered to this world. Beep, beep, beep. The sound was relentless, a digital metronome counting away the seconds of a life I suddenly did not recognize. I am Reginald King, Reggie to my friends. I am 71 years old. I spent 40 years as a structural engineer building bridges that could withstand hurricanes and skyscrapers that scraped the clouds. I know about load-bearing capacities. I know about stress fractures. And lying there in that hospital bed, I knew my own body had finally suffered a catastrophic structural failure, a stroke. I could feel the numbness on the left side of my face, a dead weight that terrified me more than any job site accident ever had. But the terror of paralysis was quickly replaced by something far colder. Voices. Familiar voices. They were close, right beside my bed. My hearing was the only sense that seemed to have returned with crystal clarity. "He is not going to make it through the week, Darius." The voice belonged to Tiffany, my daughter-in-law. It was sharp, impatient, and devoid of any warmth. She sounded like she was discussing a piece of furniture that was taking up too much space. "Lower your voice," Darius whispered. His tone was shaky, but not with grief. It was the shakiness of a man who owes money, a man who is cornered. "The doctor said he is stable. If he wakes up and sees us talking like this..." "He is not waking up," Tiffany snapped. "Look at him. He is done." The stroke scrambled his brain. "Even if he wakes up, he will be a drooling vegetable. We need to be practical, Darius. We cannot afford to keep this charade going." The words hit me harder than the stroke. This was my son, Darius. The boy I had taught to ride a bike. The man whose college tuition I had paid for in full so he could graduate without debt. The architect who I had secretly funded when no bank would touch his failing firm. I had given him everything. And here he was, standing over my broken body, debating my expiration date. "What about Mom?" Darius asked. "She is the next problem," Tiffany replied, and I could hear the rustle of her expensive coat. "We cannot take care of her, Darius. She has Alzheimer's. She is a burden. Once the old man is gone, we put her in that state facility in the suburbs, the one that takes Medicare." "No." My heart slammed against my ribs. "Not Beatrice." Beatrice was my wife of 48 years. She was the only soft thing in my hard life. She was a retired nurse who had spent her life caring for others, and now that her memory was fading, she needed me. I was her anchor. If they put her in a state facility, a place where they warehouse the forgotten, she would die of a broken heart within a month. "We need to sell the house immediately," Tiffany continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss. "The market in this historic district is peaking. That old Victorian monstrosity is sitting on a gold mine. We can list it next week. Use the power of attorney." "But Dad has the deed locked up," Darius said. "We will drill the safe," Tiffany said. "Who is going to stop us? Your mother does not even know what year it is. We sell the house, pay off your gambling debts, and finally get the life we deserve." My gambling debts. The words echoed in my mind. So that was it. Darius had relapsed. I had suspected it when he started asking for loans a few months ago, but I never imagined he was this deep. He was willing to discard his mother and let me die just to cover his mistakes. Rage. Hot, blinding rage flooded my system. It surged through my veins, fighting the paralysis. I wanted to sit up. I wanted to wrap my hands around Tiffany's throat. I wanted to slap Darius until he remembered who he was. The monitor beside my bed began to scream. The steady beep turned into a frantic rapid-fire alarm. My heart rate was spiking. The sheer force of my anger was trying to kill me. "He is crashing," Darius shouted. His voice feigned panic perfectly. "Doctor, we need a doctor in here." I heard footsteps rushing in. The heavy doors swung open. "BP is spiking 180 over 110, a new voice shouted. "Push 2 milligrams of lorazepam." I felt a cold sensation flood my arm. The rage began to dull, chemically suppressed. But in that moment of chaos, I made a choice that would define the rest of my life. I did not open my eyes. I let my body go limp. I let my breathing shallow out. I retreated back into the darkness, not because I was weak, but because I was a strategist. I was an engineer. You do not fix a collapsing bridge by standing underneath it and screaming. You assess the damage. You gather your resources. And then you rebuild or you demolish. "He is stabilizing," the doctor said after a few tense minutes. "It was just a stress reaction. He is still in a deep coma. It is hard to say if there is any brain function left at this point." I heard Darius let out a long exhale. It sounded like relief. "So what do we do now?" Darius asked. "We wait," Tiffany said. "We wait for him to die. And while we wait, we start clearing out the house. I do not want any of their junk cluttering up the sale." They stayed for another 10 minutes. They talked about listing prices. They talked about how they would remodel my kitchen to increase the value. They talked about me as if I were already a corpse in the ground. Finally, I heard the click of her heels and the shuffle of his feet leaving the room. "Call us if there is any change," Darius told the nurse. "We will be at his house, taking care of things. Taking care of things." That meant ransacking my home. That meant terrorizing my confused wife. The door closed. Silence returned to the room. But it was no longer the silence of death. It was the silence of the hunt. I waited. I counted the seconds in my head, testing my cognitive function. 1, 2, 3. My mind was sharp. The stroke had taken my left side, but it had left my intelligence intact. They had made a fatal miscalculation. Slowly, painfully, I forced my right eye to open. The hospital room was dim, lit only by the glow of the machines. My right hand felt heavy like a block of concrete, but I focused all my will into it. "Move. Move, you stubborn old man." My fingers twitched. I gritted my teeth, fighting the exhaustion that threatened to pull me back under. I reached for the IV line in my arm. The tape pulled at my skin. With a grunt of effort, I ripped the needle out. Blood trickled down my arm, warm and sticky, but I did not care. I needed my phone. They had likely taken it, but I had a backup. I always had a backup. In the pocket of my trousers, which were hanging in the plastic bag on the chair across the room, was a burner phone. I kept it for emergencies, for secure business dealings that I did not want traced back to my main accounts. I could not walk. My left leg was useless. But I could roll. I leveraged my weight and let gravity take me off the bed. I hit the floor with a heavy thud. Pain shot through my hip, but I bit my lip to keep from screaming. I dragged myself across the cold linoleum floor 1 inch at a time, using my good arm to pull my dead weight. It took me 5 minutes to reach the chair, 5 minutes of humiliating struggle, but I made it. I reached up, fumbling with the plastic bag until I felt the hard rectangle of the phone. I pulled it out. It still had battery. My fingers trembled as I dialed a number I knew by heart, a number that belonged to the only man in this world I trusted, a man who had been in the trenches with me in Vietnam and in the boardroom during the fiercest corporate takeovers. Atticus Moore, my lawyer, my brother in arms. The phone rang twice. King Atticus's voice was gravelly alert. It was 3 in the morning, but he answered like he had been waiting for this call. Omega. I rasped into the phone. My voice was weak, barely a whisper, but the code word carried the weight of a nuclear launch. There was a pause on the other end, a pause that meant Atticus was already moving, already pulling files, already loading his gun. Omega confirmed, Atticus said. His voice was cold, deadly. Is Beatrice safe? No, I wheezed. Hostiles in the perimeter. Darius. Tiffany. They are moving on the house. They think I am a vegetable. Understood, Atticus said. I am activating the extraction team. Do not move. Do not trust the hospital staff. I will have a private ambulance at the service entrance in 20 minutes. We are going dark, Reggie. I hung up the phone and let it drop to the floor. I lay there on the cold tiles, staring up at the ceiling tiles. Tears pricked my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I had spent my life building a legacy for my son. I had built a fortress to protect my family, but I had made a mistake. I had let the enemy inside the gates. Darius was not my son anymore. He was a parasite, and Tiffany was the infection. They wanted a war. They wanted my money, my house, my life. Well, they were about to find out why they called me king. I closed my eyes, gathering my strength for the extraction. The old Reggie, the loving father, the patient husband, he died in this room tonight. The man lying on the floor was something else entirely. And he was ready to burn it all down. The service elevator doors slid open with a soft hiss that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet hospital corridor. Two men in dark tactical scrubs stepped out. They did not look like hospital porters. They moved with the precision of soldiers. One of them checked a digital tablet while the other scanned the hallway. "Mr. King." The first man whispered. He did not ask. It was a statement. I nodded once. My neck was stiff and every movement sent a jolt of electricity down my spine, but I forced myself to sit up. The paralysis on my left side was fading, but my limbs still felt like they belonged to a stranger. "We are moving now," the man said. They wasted no time. There was no gentle bedside manner here. They lifted me from the hospital bed with efficient strength, transferring me into a heavy-duty wheelchair. One of them threw a dark blanket over my lap, covering the hospital gown, while the other disconnected the last of the monitors. The room went silent. The rhythmic beeping that had been the soundtrack to my son's betrayal was gone. We moved. The wheels of the chair glided silently over the linoleum. We bypassed the nurse's station. I saw the night nurse distracted by a phone call, laughing at something on the other end. She had no idea that the patient in room 304 was escaping. We reached the service bay in less than 2 minutes. The cool night air hit my face and I inhaled greedily. It tasted of exhaust fumes and freedom. A black, unmarked ambulance was idling by the curb. The back doors were already open. Atticus was inside. He sat on the bench seat, illuminated by the red glow of the equipment lights. He looked at his watch and then at me. "You are 2 minutes late, Reggie," he grumbled, but I saw the relief in his eyes. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry as sandpaper. "Get me to Beatrice." Atticus nodded to the driver. "Move." As the ambulance pulled away from the curb, I saw a familiar set of headlights swing into the hospital parking lot. It was a silver sedan, Darius's car. He was coming back. He was coming back to sign the "Do Not Resuscitate" order. He was coming back to ensure his father never woke up to challenge his claim to the throne. He would walk into an empty room. He would find a bed with the sheets still warm and the IV line dripping onto the floor. I closed my eyes and imagined the look of panic on his face. Not panic for my safety, but panic for his wallet. He was too late. The king had left the building. The ride to my house took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of Atticus briefing me on the legal landmines he had already planted. But I could not focus on the law. I could only think of my wife. Beatrice. My queen. We parked a block away from the house. The Victorian mansion stood tall and imposing against the night sky. It was a house I had bought 30 years ago, a house I had restored with my own 2 hands. It was supposed to be our sanctuary. Now it looked like a fortress occupied by enemy forces. The windows on the 2nd floor were blazing with light. I could hear the faint thumping of bass from a stereo system. They were celebrating. My son and his wife were throwing a party in my house while I was supposedly dying in a hospital bed. The medical team helped me out of the ambulance. My left leg dragged, but I forced it to work. I had the spare key hidden in a magnetic box under the porch railing. A trick from my old days. I prayed they had not changed the locks yet. My hands shook as I retrieved the key. The metal felt cold and hard. I slid it into the lock. It turned. We entered the foyer silently. The air inside was thick with the smell of expensive cologne and takeout food. My stomach turned. On the coat rack hung Darius's jacket. Next to it was Tiffany's designer purse. They had made themselves at home. I signaled the team to wait in the shadows. I needed to find Beatrice first. I checked the master bedroom on the 1st floor. It was empty. The bed was stripped bare, the mattress exposed. They had already begun clearing us out. Panic began to rise in my chest, a cold tide of fear. Where was she? I checked the guest room. Empty. I checked the sunroom. Empty. Then I heard a sound. A soft whimpering coming from the back of the house near the kitchen. It was a sound that no husband should ever have to hear. I moved toward the pantry. It was a small windowless room we used for storing canned goods and cleaning supplies. It was never meant for people. It was cold and drafty in the winter. The door was latched from the outside. My hand trembled as I slid the bolt back. I opened the door. The light from the kitchen spilled into the small space, illuminating a scene that tore my heart into shreds. Beatrice was sitting on a folding camping cot squeezed between shelves of pasta sauce and paper towels. She was wearing a thin nightgown stained with soup. Her silver hair, usually so immaculately braided, was matted and wild. She was shivering, her arms wrapped around her knees, rocking back and forth. On the floor next to her was a plastic dog bowl filled with water and a half-eaten sandwich on a paper napkin. They had treated her like an animal. "Beatrice," I choked out. She looked up. Her eyes were cloudy, vacant with the fog of her illness. For a moment, she did not recognize me. Then a flicker of recognition sparked in the darkness. "Reggie," she whispered. Her voice was thin and brittle. "Is it time for church?" I fell to my knees beside her, ignoring the screaming pain in my hip. I wrapped my arms around her. She was ice cold. Her skin felt like parchment paper. "No, baby, it is not time for church. It is time to go home." Upstairs, a peal of laughter rang out. It was Tiffany. She was laughing loud and drunk. I heard the clinking of glasses. "Cheers to the new house." Darius's voice boomed through the floorboards. He was toasting to his inheritance. He was celebrating his victory while his mother froze in a pantry downstairs. The rage I felt in the hospital was nothing compared to this. This was not anger. This was a cold, absolute resolve. In that dark pantry, holding my shivering wife, I made a vow. I would not just defeat them. I would obliterate them. I would strip them of every comfort, every dollar, every shred of dignity, until they understood the depth of their sin. I stood up, pulling Beatrice with me. She was frail, light as a bird. "Come on, Bea," I said softly. "Where are we going, Reggie?" she asked, looking around the pantry with confusion. "Away from the monsters," I said. I signaled the team. Two large men appeared in the kitchen doorway. They took one look at the situation, and their professional masks slipped. I saw the disgust on their faces as they looked at the dog bowl on the floor. "Get her to the car," I commanded. They moved swiftly, wrapping Beatrice in a thermal blanket and supporting her weight. I followed them to the back door. Before I stepped out into the night, I stopped. I turned back to look at my kitchen. I saw the granite countertops I had installed for Beatrice's 60th birthday. I saw the oak table where we had eaten thousands of meals. I saw the height chart carved into the doorframe marking Darius's growth from a toddler to a man. I could hear them walking around upstairs. Their footsteps were heavy, claiming ownership of a space they did not earn. "Take a good look, Darius," I thought. "Enjoy the champagne. Enjoy the soft sheets and the warm fire, because winter is coming for you, son, and it is going to be longer and colder than you can possibly imagine." I stepped out onto the porch and closed the door. The latch clicked shut with a sound like a hammer falling on a judge's bench. I climbed into the back of the ambulance next to Beatrice. She was already asleep, exhausted by her ordeal. I took her hand in mine. It was beginning to warm up. "Drive," I told Atticus. The vehicle rolled away into the darkness, leaving the house and the past behind. I did not look back. The king was awake, and the war had just begun. I sat in the dark of the safe house living room, the blue light of a tablet illuminating my face like a ghost. On the screen, a high-definition nightmare was playing out in real time. I had installed hidden cameras in the molding of my Victorian home 3 months ago when I first noticed Darius looking at my silverware with the eyes of a pawnbroker. I never thought I would actually have to use them. I never thought I would sit here safe and warm while watching my only son desecrate the temple I had built for his mother. On the screen, Darius was sweating. He was in my study, kneeling before the wall safe I had hidden behind the portrait of my grandfather. He held a heavy-duty industrial drill, his hands shaking so hard the bit skittered across the steel face of the safe, screeching like a dying animal. "Faster, Darius!" Tiffany screamed from the doorway. She was pacing back and forth like a caged tiger, grabbing books off the shelves and shaking them, hoping cash would flutter out before throwing them onto the floor. "The hospital called 10 minutes ago. They know he is gone. If the police show up before we find the deeds, we are finished." "I cannot go any faster," Darius yelled back, sweat dripping from his nose onto the carpet. "This is reinforced steel. The old man built it himself. It is solid." He drilled. The metal groaned. I watched impassively, taking a sip of water. I knew exactly how long it would take. I had designed that safe. It would take him another 4 minutes to breach the locking mechanism. Finally, with a loud crack, the lock gave way. Darius dropped the drill. The silence that followed was heavy with greed. He reached out his hand trembling and swung the heavy steel door open. Tiffany rushed to his side, her eyes wide, reflecting the hunger of a starving wolf. They expected to see stacks of cash. They expected gold bars. They expected the bearer bonds from the municipal projects I had consulted on in the 90s. They found dust. The safe was empty, save for a single index card folded in the center of the middle shelf. Darius snatched it up. He turned it over looking for a combination or a bank account number. He found only my handwriting. Read it. Tiffany demanded, her voice shrill. Darius read it aloud, his voice cracking with disbelief. True wealth is found in the mind, son, not in the box. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Tiffany exploded. It was a sound of pure primal rage. She grabbed a porcelain vase from the mantelpiece, a vase Beatrice had hand-painted 40 years ago, and hurled it against the wall. It shattered into 1,000 pieces. He knew she shrieked. That manipulative old man knew. He played us. She turned on Darius, slapping his chest. You said he was hoarding it here. You said he did not trust banks. You told me the millions were in this house. I did think they were here. Darius stammered, backing away from her. He is old school. He always paid contractors in cash. He is not just old school, Darius. He is a genius, and you are an idiot. Tiffany spat the words out, her face twisted into an ugly mask. Do you have any idea who your father really is? Do you think he just fixed bridges? He holds the patents for the seismic dampeners used in half the skyscrapers in San Francisco. He has royalties coming in from the structural reinforcement systems he designed in the 80s. He is not just a retired engineer. He is the Iron King. He has millions sitting somewhere accumulating interest while we drown in your gambling debts. I watched the screen, my face expressionless, but my heart aching. So she knew. Tiffany knew about the patents. She had done her homework. I had never spoken about the scale of my work at home. To Darius, I was just a dad who smelled like concrete and dust. I wanted him to make his own way, to find his own success without the shadow of my achievements looming over him. I wanted him to be hungry, but he was not hungry. He was just greedy, and Tiffany was the one holding the fork. Where is it? Darius shouted, kicking the desk. Where is the money? It is offshore, you moron, Tiffany hissed. He must have moved it, or maybe he put it in a trust for that senile wife of his. We have to find them. We have to find them and make him sign it over before he changes the will. She began tearing the room apart in earnest now. She ripped the drawers out of my desk, dumping my drafting tools onto the floor. She swept my collection of vintage compasses off the shelf. Then she stopped. Her eyes fell on the wedding photo on the wall, the one of Beatrice and me on the steps of the church in 1974. Beatrice looked so young, so full of hope, holding my hand. Tiffany walked over to it. She stared at Beatrice's smiling face for a moment, and then she sneered. Look at her, she said, her voice dripping with venom. That useless old woman. She does not even know her own name anymore, and she is sitting on a fortune. She is nothing but a burden, a dead weight dragging us all down. She reached up and ripped the canvas from the frame. She tore it down the middle, separating Beatrice from me, and then threw the pieces onto the pile of debris on the floor. That was the moment. Up until then, I had been watching a crime. Now I was watching a declaration of war. They had violated my home. They had insulted my wife. They had destroyed the sanctuary of my memories. I set the tablet down on the coffee table. My hands were steady, cold. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed in the dim room, illuminating the face of a man who had no mercy left to give. I logged into the secure banking portal. The interface was familiar, clean, and efficient. I navigated to the sub-accounts, the ones I had set up 5 years ago when Darius said he wanted to start his own firm. I had funded them quietly, seeding them with enough capital to give him a start, to give him a safety net. I saw the balance. It was lower than it should have been. He had been draining it faster than I thought, likely feeding the casinos and Tiffany's designer tastes. But there was still enough there to keep them afloat. Enough to pay for gas, for food, for the hotel room they would need when the eviction notice hit. I hovered the mouse cursor over the button marked Suspend All Activity. I looked back at the tablet screen. Darius was now sitting in my leather chair, his head in his hands, defeated. Tiffany was still raging, kicking through the mess she had made, screaming about how unfair it was, how she deserved better. She deserved nothing, and he deserved a lesson. I did not hesitate. I clicked the mouse. A small window popped up. Confirm suspension of all supplementary cards and joint assets associated with Darius King. I clicked yes. Status updated frozen. I closed the laptop. The only light left in the room came from the tablet where my son and his wife were still frantically searching a house that was no longer theirs for money that no longer existed. I leaned back in the chair. The silence of the safe house was heavy, but it was clean. It did not smell of betrayal. Go ahead, Darius, I whispered to the empty room. Try to buy dinner tonight. Try to fill your gas tank. You wanted to be the man of the house. You wanted my legacy. Well, you just got it. You got the struggle. You got the hunger. Welcome to the real world, son. Let us see if you can survive in it. Darius sat at the head of the table at the Gilded Lily, the most expensive steakhouse in the city, surrounded by 5 of his so-called friends. These were men who wore shiny suits and laughed too loud at jokes that were not funny sharks smelling blood in the water, but Darius thought they were admirers. He raised a glass of 30-year-old scotch to the chandelier light. To the future, he announced, his voice booming over the gentle piano music. To the king, legacy finally being in the right hands. They cheered, clinking crystal glasses, ordering Wagyu beef and lobster towers like it was water. I watched the transaction alert pop up on my laptop screen in the safe house. Authorization request $5,400. I took a sip of my tea and clicked deny. Back in the restaurant, the mood shifted instantly. The waiter returned to the table, not with a receipt to sign, but with the card held between 2 fingers like a piece of trash. Sir, the card has been declined. Darius laughed a nervous, brittle sound. Run it again. It is a black card. It does not get declined. It has been declined twice, sir, the waiter said, his voice carrying across the silent dining room. Do you have another form of payment? The sharks stopped eating. They looked at Darius, then at each other. The air in the room grew heavy with second-hand embarrassment. Darius fumbled for his wallet, pulling out the corporate card for his architecture firm. Try this one, he snapped. The waiter took it and walked away. 2 minutes later, he was back. Also declined, sir. And the bank has flagged it for suspicious activity. I am going to have to keep the card. The silence at the table was deafening. Darius turned red, then purple. This is a mistake, he shouted, standing up, knocking his chair over. My father is Reginald King. Do you know who I am? The waiter signaled to the manager, who was already walking over with 2 large security guards. I do not care who your father is, sir, the manager said. You have eaten $5,000 worth of food. Pay the bill or we call the police. Darius patted his pockets. He looked at his friends. Guys, I must have triggered a fraud alert moving some assets around. Can one of you cover this? I will wire you double tomorrow. The sharks suddenly found their shoes very interesting. One checked his watch. Another remembered he had an early meeting. They threw cash on the table, barely enough to cover their own drinks, and scattered like roaches when the lights come on, leaving Darius alone with the bill and his humiliation. He had to leave his Rolex, the one I gave him for graduation, as collateral. As he walked out into the cold night, he was not a king. He was a pauper in a borrowed suit. The humiliation at the restaurant was just the appetizer. The main course was waiting for him at his office. Darius drove his leased Mercedes like a madman, speeding toward the glass and steel building that housed DK Architecture. He needed cash. He needed to liquidate the emergency operating fund, the one he thought only he had access to. He parked illegally on the curb and sprinted into the lobby, ignoring the night watchman. He took the elevator to the 20th floor, stabbing the button with a shaking finger. He burst into his office, sweating and panting. He sat at his desk and logged into the firm's banking portal. Access denied. He typed the password again. Access denied. User account suspended. He slammed his fist onto the keyboard. What is going on? He screamed to the empty room. He grabbed the landline to call ATA, but the line was dead. Then the door to his office opened. He spun around, expecting a security guard. Instead, he saw Atticus Moore. My lawyer was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than Darius's car. He stood in the doorway, calm and immovable like a statue of judgment. What are you doing here? Darius demanded, his voice cracking. Get out of my office. It is not your office anymore, Darius, Atticus said, stepping into the room. He placed a single sheet of paper on the desk. It is a notice of suspension effective immediately. Who did this? Darius asked, picking up the paper. The board loves me. I built this firm. You built nothing, Atticus replied, his voice cold and sharp. You were funded by an angel investor, a silent partner who holds 60% of the voting shares. Did you never wonder who kept bailing you out when your designs went over budget? Darius froze. No, it cannot be. It is Atticus confirmed. Your father. Reginald King is the majority shareholder, and as his legal proxy I am executing a vote of no confidence. You are being removed for financial impropriety and gross incompetence. Security is on the way to escort you out. You have 5 minutes to collect your personal effects. Leave the laptop and the phone. They are company property. Darius sank into his chair. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The father he had mocked, the father he had tried to kill, had owned him the entire time. He had been playing CEO in a sandbox I had built for him, and I had just taken away the shovel. He was standing on the sidewalk outside his office holding a cardboard box with a stapler and a framed photo of himself when his personal phone rang. It was Tiffany. He answered hoping for a lifeline, hoping she had found the deeds or sold the jewelry. Instead, he heard a banshee screaming. "What did you do, Darius? What did you do?" "Calm down," he shouted back, his nerves frayed to the breaking point. "I just lost the firm. Dad owns it. He fired me. I do not care about your stupid firm," Tiffany shrieked. "The realtor just called. The open house is canceled. The buyers pulled their offers. Someone filed a lien on the property, Darius. A massive lien. There is a notice of dispute filed with the county clerk. We cannot sell the house. We cannot even refinance it. It is radioactive." Darius dropped the box. The stapler clattered onto the concrete. "He froze my accounts too," he whispered. "My cards are dead." Tiffany's scream turned into a sob of pure rage. "You useless idiot! You told me he was handled. You told me he was a vegetable. How is a man in a coma destroying our lives? He is not in a coma." Darius said the truth, finally piercing his thick skull. "He is awake, and he is coming for us." The line went dead. Darius stood alone on the street corner. He had no job. He had no money. He had no house to sell. And for the first time in his life, he realized he had no father to save him. The city lights blurred through his tears, not of sorrow, but of terror. He was beginning to understand what it meant to be truly alone. Then that xin lôi ban vì sự cô này. Đó là lỗi kỹ thuật của tôi trong quá trình xử lý dữ liệu. Tôi đã sơ suất đưa nhầm nội dung của phần 2 vào câu trả lời vừa rồi thay vì viết mọi phần 5 như bạn yêu cầu. Tôi xin phép sửa sai ngay lập tức. Dưới đây là nội dung chính xác và mỗi hoàn toàn của phần 5 màn kịch. Của những đứa con được viết tiếp theo mạch truyền sau khi Darius bị đuổi khỏi công ty và Tiffany hoang loạn vì không bán được nhà. The silence in the safe house was broken 3 days later, not by a phone call, but by a rhythmic pounding on the reinforced steel door. I was sitting in the armchair by the window, Beatrice asleep in the room next door, enjoying the first peaceful rest she had in years. I checked the security monitor. It was them. Darius and Tiffany stood on the front porch, but they did not look like the screaming banshees who had threatened me over the phone. They had changed costumes. Darius was wearing a modest sweater instead of his flashy suits. Tiffany had scrubbed off her heavy makeup and was wearing a simple dress. And most manipulatively of all, they had brought Leo Tiffany's 6-year-old son from her first marriage. They were playing the family card. I watched them on the screen. Darius looked at the camera lens hidden in the doorbell, not with anger, but with a practiced expression of concern. "Dad," he called out, his voice muffled by the heavy door. "We know you are in there. Please open up. We just want to talk. We are worried about you." I felt a bile rise in my throat. Worried. They were worried about their inheritance, not me. They had hired a private investigator. I had spotted the man parked down the street yesterday to track me down. Now that threats and theft had failed, they were resorting to the oldest trick in the book, emotional blackmail. I looked at Beatrice. She was fragile. If she saw them, she would want to let them in. Her heart did not remember their cruelty, only their faces. I had a choice to make. I could keep the door locked, call the police, and have them removed for harassment. But that would only delay the inevitable. They would keep coming. They would drag this out in court, claiming I was mentally unstable and holding my wife hostage. No. If I wanted to end this, I had to let them in. I had to let them think they had won. I went to the mirror in the hallway. I messed up my hair, pulling tufts of gray out to look unkempt. I unbuttoned my shirt so it hung loosely on my frame. I took off my glasses, making my eyes look unfocused and watery. I needed to become the man they wanted me to be. The confused, senile old man who had run away because he was scared, not because he was angry. I unlocked the deadbolts one by one, making sure my hands trembled visibly as I opened the door. Dad Darius exhaled, rushing forward to embrace me. It was a hug that felt like a shackle. Oh, thank God. We have been looking everywhere for you." I pulled away, blinking rapidly, looking past him as if I saw shadows dancing in the daylight. "The house," I mumbled, my voice cracking. "The house was too loud, Darius. The walls were screaming. I had to leave. Had to." Darius exchanged a quick glance with Tiffany. I saw the spark of triumph in their eyes. They bought it. They thought the stroke had finally scrambled my circuits. They thought the paranoia had set in. "It is okay," Reggie, Tiffany said, stepping forward, her voice dripping with a sickly sweetness. "We are here now. We will make the screaming stop. Look, Leo is here to see you." She pushed the boy forward. He looked confused and scared, holding a toy truck. "Hi, Grandpa Reggie," he whispered. My heart broke for the boy. He was innocent in this, a prop in their stage play. I patted his head gently. "Hello, son." "Where is Mom?" Darius asked, looking past me into the apartment. "She is sleeping," I said. She was tired. The ghosts kept waking her up. "Ghosts," Darius repeated. He put a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt heavy and possessive. "Dad, there are no ghosts. You are confused. It is the stroke. You are not well." "Maybe," I said, letting my shoulders slump. "Maybe I'm not. I just want it to be quiet." "We can help with that," Tiffany said. "We can take you somewhere quiet, somewhere safe. We found a place, Dad, a beautiful place with doctors and nurses who can help you and Mom feel better. A nursing home." The trap was set. I looked at them, letting fear wash over my face. "I do not want to go to a hospital." "Not a hospital," Tiffany corrected quickly. "A community, a home. Just for a little while, just until you get your strength back, then you can go back to your house." Lies. If I stepped foot in that place, I would never come out. But I needed them to commit the crime. I needed them to sign the admission papers using the forged power of attorney. I needed physical proof that they were kidnapping us. I looked at Darius, my son, the boy I had carried on my shoulders. I gave him one last chance to be a human being. "Darius," I asked, my voice lucid for just a second, "do you promise you will take care of us?" He looked me in the eye. He did not blink. "I promise, Dad. We will take care of everything." He was signing his own warrant. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay. We will go." Darius let out a breath he had been holding. "Good. That is good. Let us get Mom. We have a car waiting." I went into the bedroom and woke Beatrice. She smiled when she saw me. "Hey, handsome," she said. "Is the coffee ready? We are going for a ride." "Bea," I told her, helping her sit up. "Darius is here." "Darius!" She clapped her hands, delighted. "Is he staying for dinner?" "Something like that," I said. I packed a small bag, moving slowly, playing the part. I made sure to leave my tablet and the main burner phone hidden under the floorboards of the closet. I only took the dummy phone they knew about. As we walked out to their car, a beat-up minivan they had likely rented to look humble, I saw Tiffany texting furiously on her phone. She was probably messaging the forger or the facility, telling them the package was secured. They helped us into the back seat. Darius got into the driver's seat and looked at me in the rearview mirror. "You made the right choice, Dad," he said. I looked out the window at the passing city. I did not reply. I knew exactly where we were going. I had tracked their internet searches. Sunny Meadows, a state-funded warehouse for the indigent and the unwanted on the outskirts of town. A place with a history of citations for neglect and abuse. That was where they were taking the man who had built half the skyline of this city. The drive was long and silent. Beatrice fell asleep, her head on my shoulder. I held her hand, feeling the thin bones beneath her skin. I would endure this for her. I would walk into hell so I could drag the devils into the light. When the van finally slowed down, the scenery had changed. The manicured lawns of the suburbs were gone, replaced by cracked pavement and chain-link fences. We pulled up to a gray concrete building that looked more like a prison than a care facility. "We are here," Tiffany announced with false cheerfulness. I looked up at the sign. Sunny Meadows Extended Care. The letters were peeling. There were bars on the windows. I stepped out of the van, acting confused and frightened. "This does not look like a home, Darius. It is just the exterior, Dad," Darius said, gripping my arm firmly. "Inside it is very nice. Come on." They marched us to the front desk. The smell hit me first. Urine, bleach, and old cabbage. It was the smell of despair. A heavy-set woman in a stained uniform looked up from behind plexiglass. "King admission," she barked. "Yes," Tiffany said, stepping forward and pulling a folder from her bag. I have the paperwork here. I am the power of attorney. She signed. I watched her pen move across the paper. She was using the forged documents. She was legally committing a felony right in front of me. Take them to Ward C, the woman said, handing Tiffany 2 plastic wristbands. Ward C, the dementia ward, the lockdown unit. They led us down a long hallway. We passed rooms with 4 beds crammed into them, elderly people staring blankly at flickering televisions. Moans echoed from behind closed doors. "This is it," Darius said, stopping in front of room 302. It was a small room with 2 narrow cots and a single window that looked out onto a brick wall. "Get settled in?" Dad Tiffany said. "We will bring your things later." She did not mean it. They were never coming back. I turned to Darius. "When will you visit?" "Soon, Dad. Soon." He would not meet my eyes. They turned to leave. Tiffany paused at the door. "Oh, Reggie," she said, dropping the act for just a second. Her voice was cold, hard, and triumphant. "Don't wait up." The door clicked shut. I heard the lock turn from the outside. We were prisoners. Beatrice sat on the edge of the cot looking around the bleak room. "Reggie," she said, her voice trembling, "I do not like this hotel." I sat beside her and put my arm around her. "It is okay, baby. We are not staying." I looked at the camera in the corner of the ceiling. It was a dummy, a fake plastic dome meant to reassure families. But I had something better. I reached into my sock and pulled out a micro GPS tracker the size of a button. I pressed the activation sequence. Atticus was watching. The timer had started. They thought they had buried us in a concrete tomb, but they had just locked themselves in a cage with a lion, and the lion was hungry for justice. The tires of the rented minivan crunched over broken glass and gravel as we turned off the main highway. I sat in the back seat, clutching Beatrice's hand, feeling the tremor of her fear vibrate through her thin bones. Darius was driving, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds to check on me. He was looking for the father he thought he knew, the confused invalid who needed protection. He did not see the wolf sitting in the back seat, counting the streetlights and memorizing the route. We had left the manicured lawns of our historic district miles ago. The scenery outside the window had deteriorated into a landscape of abandoned warehouses, liquor stores with bars on the windows, and pawn shops. This was the edge of the city, the place where they swept the things they did not want to look at anymore. I knew where we were. I had built the structural supports for the overpass that loomed above us, casting a long shadow over the neighborhood. This was the Bottoms, and nestled deep within this concrete wasteland was a place I knew by reputation only. Sunny Meadows. The name was a cruel joke. It was a state-funded warehouse for the indigent, the forgotten, and the unwanted. It was the place you sent people when you wanted them to die quickly and cheaply. "Is this the place, Darius?" I asked, my voice trembling with a feigned senile fear. "It looks dark, son." "It is just the area," Dad Darius replied, his voice tight. "Once we get inside, it is very nice. They have a garden." He was lying through his teeth. There was no garden. There was only a parking lot filled with potholes and a dumpster overflowing with trash. Tiffany turned around in the front seat. Her face was flushed with excitement. "Stop complaining, Reggie. You are lucky we found a bed for you at all. Most places have a waiting list for people in your condition. My condition. My condition was that I was a multimillionaire being kidnapped by my own family, but I stayed silent, letting my head loll against the window." We pulled up to the front entrance. The building was a block of gray concrete stained with years of pollution and neglect. The sign above the door had a missing letter, so it read, "Sunny Edo's." Darius killed the engine. For a moment, he just sat there, gripping the wheel. I saw his shoulders heave. Was it guilt? Was it hesitation? "Get them out!" Tiffany snapped, opening her door. "We have a schedule, Darius. The notary is meeting us at the bank in an hour." Darius nodded, swallowing hard. He got out and slid the side door open. "Come on, Dad. Let us get you settled." I stepped out onto the cracked pavement, my legs moving slowly, shuffling like an old man. I helped Beatrice out. She looked at the gray building and whimpered. "Reggie, I do not want to go in there," she whispered. "It smells like the sad place." "It is okay, Bee," I murmured in her ear. "Just a little while. Stay close to me." We walked through the automatic doors, which shuddered and groaned as they opened. The smell hit us instantly. It was a physical wall of stench. stale urine, boiled cabbage, industrial bleach, and the underlying rot of untreated bed sores. It was the smell of human misery. The lobby was dim lit by flickering fluorescent tubes that buzzed like angry hornets. The floor was scuffed linoleum sticky underfoot. In the corner, an old man in a wheelchair sat facing the wall, muttering to himself, his hospital gown stained and open at the back. There was no receptionist smiling to greet us. There was only a glass partition smeared with grease behind which sat a large woman with a tired face chewing gum aggressively. "King admission," Tiffany announced, slapping a manila folder onto the counter. The woman did not even look up. "Paperwork." Tiffany slid the forged documents through the slot. I watched her hand. It was steady. She had practiced for this. She was committing fraud, kidnapping, and elder abuse, and she did not even blink. "Ward C," the woman grunted, stamping a form. "Room 12. Down the hall, turn left past the cafeteria." Ward C. I knew what that meant. It was the lockdown unit. The place for dementia patients and flight risks. The place where they locked the doors from the outside. We began the long walk down the corridor. The walls were painted a depressing shade of beige, peeling in long strips like dead skin. We passed rooms where 4 or 5 beds were crammed together, separated only by thin curtains. I heard coughing. I heard crying. I saw a woman lying in her own waste, pressing the call button that no one was answering. This was my son's plan for me. This was the reward for 40 years of fatherhood. We reached room 12. It was a small box with 2 metal cots and a single high window covered in wire mesh. There was no privacy curtain. There was no bathroom, just a commode in the corner. "It is cozy," Tiffany said, looking around with a sneer. Darius stood in the doorway, refusing to enter. He looked pale. "We need your personal effects." The woman from the front desk appeared behind us, holding a plastic bin. "No outside items allowed in Ward C. Phones, wallets, jewelry. Hand them over. It is policy." Dad Darius said, his voice hollow. "For your safety." I looked at him. I looked deep into his eyes, searching for a trace of the boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee. I found nothing. Just a weak man controlled by a greedy woman. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the dummy wallet I had prepared. It contained $50 and an expired driver's license. I handed it to Darius. "Take care of it, son," I said. He took it, his hand shaking. "I will, Dad." And the phone, Tiffany demanded, holding out her hand. I handed her the old flip phone I had been carrying. She snatched it with a greedy smile. "Good," she said, tossing it into the bin. "You will not be needing this. You have us to handle your calls now." She leaned in close to me. Her perfume was overpowering, masking the smell of the facility. She lowered her voice so only I could hear. "Make yourself comfortable, Reggie," she hissed, "because you are never leaving. You are going to rot in here until you die, you stubborn old black man. And when you are gone, I am going to burn every picture of you and turn your precious house into a parking lot." The racial slur hung in the air, toxic and hateful. She had finally said what she had been thinking for 10 years. She did not just hate me because I was in her way. She hated me because of who I was. She turned to leave, grabbing Darius by the arm. "Let us go. We have money to spend." "Wait!" Beatrice cried out, reaching for Darius. "Son, do not leave us. I am scared." She grabbed Darius's sleeve. Her grip was weak, trembling. "Let go of him," Tiffany snapped. An orderly appeared in the doorway. He was a giant of a man with thick arms and a cruel, bored expression. His name tag read, "Bucky." "Trouble here," Bucky grunted. "She is grabbing me," Tiffany said, playing the victim instantly. "The old woman is aggressive." Bucky stepped forward. He did not ask questions. He did not try to de-escalate. He just reacted. He raised a heavy hand and shoved Beatrice backward. It was not a gentle push. It was a violent shove. Beatrice, frail and confused, lost her footing. She stumbled back, her arms flailing, and hit the hard linoleum floor with a sickening thud. She cried out a sound of pure pain and terror, holding her hip. That was the moment the world stopped. The sound of my wife hitting the floor shattered the facade I had been maintaining for days. The confused old man vanished. The stroke victim disappeared. In his place, Reginald King, the structural engineer who had climbed steel girders in high winds, the Vietnam veteran who had survived the jungle, stood up. I did not shake. I did not stumble. I straightened my spine to its full 6'2" height. My eyes locked onto Bucky. "Hey, old man, sit down," Bucky growled, stepping toward me, reaching for his belt where a set of restraints hung. He made the mistake of thinking I was prey. He reached for my shoulder. I didn't block him. I stepped into his space, cutting the distance. My left hand, usually feigned as paralyzed, shot up and clamped onto his wrist. I applied pressure to the radial nerve. Bucky's eyes went wide with shock. Before he could scream, I stepped behind him using his own momentum against him. I kicked the back of his knee and he buckled. I drove his face into the wall with a controlled, precise force. Not enough to kill him, but enough to turn his lights out. He slid to the floor unconscious in 3 seconds flat. I stood over him, adjusting my cuffs. I checked my pulse. It was steady. I turned around. Darius and Tiffany were frozen in the doorway. Their mouths were open. Their eyes were bulging. They looked like they were seeing a ghost. "Reggie," Tiffany whispered. Her voice was a squeak of terror. I walked over to Beatrice. I knelt down effortlessly, my joints working perfectly, and helped her sit up. "Are you okay, baby?" I asked softly, checking her for injuries. "I think so, Reggie," she said, clinging to me. "That man was mean." "He will not bother you again," I promised. I stood up again and turned to face my son. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. Darius was backing away, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "Dad," he stammered. "Dad, you are okay." I took a step toward him. The floorboards creaked under my weight. I was not a ghost. I was a judgment. "I am not just okay, Darius," I said, my voice deep and resonant, filling the small room. "I am awake. Dad, we did not know." Tiffany started to lie, her eyes darting to the exit. "Shut up," I barked. The command cracked like a whip. Tiffany flinched and silenced herself. I looked at Darius. I looked at the man who had just watched his mother get shoved to the floor and done nothing. "You thought I was weak," I said, walking toward him until he hit the door frame. "You thought I was feeble. You thought you could bury me in a hole and walk away with my kingdom. Dad, please." Darius whimpered, tears streaming down his face. I reached out and grabbed his collar. I pulled him close so he could smell the lack of fear on me. "You forgot who raised you," I whispered. "You forgot that before I was an old man, I was a warrior, and you just declared war on the wrong soldier." Sirens began to wail in the distance. Atticus. He had been tracking the GPS. He had heard the audio from the bug I planted on myself. The cavalry was coming. I let go of Darius and he slumped against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the dirty floor. "Get up," I told Beatrice, helping her to her feet. "Our ride is here." I looked at Tiffany, who was trembling in the corner, clutching her designer bag like a shield. "You said you wanted to clear out the house, Tiffany?" I said, my voice cold as ice. "Well, start running, because by the time I am done with you, the only thing you will own is the jumpsuit the state gives you." I walked out of the room, holding my wife's hand, stepping over the unconscious orderly, leaving my son and his wife in the wreckage of their own greed. The king had returned, and mercy was not on the agenda. The sirens were the sweetest music I had ever heard, slicing through the stale air of sunny meadows like a blade. 2 uniformed officers burst into the cramped room, guns drawn but pointed at the floor, followed by a gaggle of confused orderlies. Tiffany did not miss a beat, throwing herself at the nearest officer with Oscar-worthy tears streaming down her face. "Officer, thank God you are here," she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "My father-in-law has dementia and he is violent. He just attacked this poor orderly for no reason. Look at him. He is dangerous." Bucky was groaning on the floor, holding his face, blood trickling from his nose, and I knew how this looked. A 6'2" black man standing over a fallen white man in a state facility. "Officer," she continued, pulling the crumpled papers from her purse. "I have the power of attorney right here. I am his legal guardian. He needs to be restrained. He needs to be sedated immediately for his own safety." The officer looked at Bucky, then at me, commanding me to step away from the wall and keep my hands visible. I moved slowly, deliberately, letting Tiffany dig her hole deeper. "He has been threatening us all day," she yelled, emboldened by the officer's command, claiming I was paranoid and thought they were stealing my money, begging them to take me to the psychiatric ward. Darius stood in the corner, pale and sweating, nodding along with her lies, but his eyes darted around the room looking for an exit, knowing something was wrong because his father did not just wake up from a coma with the fighting skills of a young soldier. The officer reached for his handcuffs, stating that if she had the paperwork, they would have to take me into custody. Tiffany smiled, a small, cruel twitch of her lips, thinking she had won, thinking she was about to get rid of me legally and permanently. That was when the air in the room changed, not from a sound, but from a presence. A man in a bespoke three-piece suit stepped through the doorway, pushing past the bewildered hospital staff, moving with the confidence of a man who owned the ground he walked on, carrying a leather briefcase and a tablet. Atticus Moore. Officer put the cuffs away. Atticus said, his voice deep and resonant, commanding immediate obedience unless you plan on using them on the woman standing next to you. The officer dropped his hand, asking who he was. I am Reginald King's attorney. Atticus replied, stepping between me and the police, and I am here to prevent you from participating in a kidnapping. Kidnapping? Tiffany scoffed, her voice cracking, claiming it was ridiculous and that she had the papers. Papers forged 3 days ago. Atticus countered calmly, opening his briefcase to produce a thick file. Here are Mr. King's actual medical records dated from this morning. As you can see, he was examined by an independent neurologist. His cognitive functions are perfect. He has no history of dementia. He suffered a minor stroke from which he has fully recovered. He is as sane as you or I, officer, probably saner than the people accusing him. The officer took the file, flipping through the pages while Tiffany went white, screaming that it was a lie and that I had bribed a doctor. Did he? Atticus asked, holding up the tablet, and did he also bribe you to practice his signature on your kitchen counter last Tuesday? He pressed play and turned the screen toward the officers and Darius, showing the crystal clear footage from the hidden camera I had installed in my own kitchen, showing Tiffany sitting at the island surrounded by scraps of paper, holding my favorite fountain pen, signing Reginald King over and over again, muttering that practice makes perfect. In the room, the real Tiffany gasped, clutching her chest while Darius stared at the screen, his mouth hanging open. That is not all, Atticus said, swiping the screen, playing a snippet of audio where my son's voice discussed disposing of his parents' bodies if the nursing home plan failed. The officer looked up from the tablet, his expression hardened, looking at Tiffany, then at Darius, ordering her to step away from me. No, Tiffany backed away, shaking her head, claiming it was a trick, a deep fake, but the officer told her she was under arrest for fraud and elder abuse. Darius did not move. He did not look at the police or his wife. He looked at me. For the first time in his life, he really saw me. Not the ATM machine he had been withdrawing from for years, not the old man he thought was weak and foolish, but the man who had survived wars, both military and corporate, the man who had built a fortune from nothing, the father who had loved him enough to let him fail, but who respected himself enough to punish betrayal. Dad, he whispered the word falling from his lips like a stone. You set us up. I took a step forward, looking down at my son, who looked small and pathetic, a child wearing a man's suit. I did not set you up, Darius, I said, my voice low and steady. I just turned the lights on. You did the rest. You let us bring you here, he said, tears welling in his eyes. You let us think we won. Why would you do that? Because I needed to know, I replied. I needed to know if there was any part of my son left inside of you, any part that would hesitate, any part that would protect his mother. I looked at Beatrice, who was watching us with wide, frightened eyes, clinging to Atticus's arm. I gave you every chance, Darius. I gave you the keys to the kingdom, and you tried to bury me under the floorboards. Darius fell to his knees, not in repentance, but in the collapse of his reality, sobbing and apologizing. I looked at him, cold and unmoved. Sorry is for accidents, Darius, I said, turning my back on him. This was an execution you just missed. Atticus signaled the officers to get them out of my sight. As they dragged a screaming Tiffany and a weeping Darius out of the room, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Not joy, but the heavy satisfaction of a job finished. The king was awake. The traitors were vanquished, but the night was not over. There was still one more fire to light. The walk of shame from the police station was nothing compared to the homecoming that awaited my son and his wife. They had been released pending a further hearing, a temporary freedom granted only because the wheels of justice grind slow, but they returned to a house that was no longer a home. It was a mausoleum of their failures. From the vantage point of the rented sedan parked down the street, I watched them stumble up the driveway. Darius looked like a man who had gone 10 rounds with a heavyweight champion. His suit was rumpled, his tie missing, his posture broken. Tiffany trailed behind him, no longer the arrogant queen of the castle, but a frightened animal looking for a place to hide. They had barely unlocked the front door when the first domino of their destruction fell. A black SUV with tinted windows screeched to a halt at the curb, blocking the driveway. 2 men stepped out. They did not look like lawyers or police officers. They wore leather jackets and carried baseball bats with the casual menace of men who used them for work, not sport. I knew who they were. They were the collection agency for the underworld, the muscle sent by the loan sharks Darius had borrowed from to fund his gambling addiction. Atticus had warned me they were circling, but seeing them in the flesh sent a cold spike of adrenaline through my veins. Darius froze on the porch key, half turned in the lock. "Hey!" one of the men shouted. His voice was a gravelly bark that echoed in the quiet suburban street. "King, you owe Mr. Varga a lot of money, and Mr. Varga is tired of waiting." Darius tried to stammer an excuse, to beg for more time, but the men were not interested in conversation. They were there to send a message. The first man swung his bat. It connected with the taillight of Darius's leased Mercedes with a sickening crunch of plastic and glass. The second man went for the windshield. Smash! The safety glass spiderwebbed into 1,000 diamonds. Smash! 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 They systematically destroyed the car, pounding the metal until it looked like a crushed soda can. It was a violent, efficient dismantling of the only status symbol Darius had left. Tiffany screamed, clutching her hands to her mouth, backing against the front door as if she could melt through the wood. The leader of the pair walked up the driveway, stepping over the shattered glass. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and pointed the bat at Darius. 48 hours, he said, his voice low and deadly. 48 hours to pay in full. Or next time we do not hit the car, we hit the wife. They got back into the SUV and drove away, leaving silence and wreckage in their wake. Darius slumped against the doorframe, sliding down until he hit the porch floor. He put his head in his hands and began to sob. It was a pathetic sound, the sound of a man who realizes the walls are not just closing in, they are crushing him. Inside the house, the panic set in. I had hacked into the internal security system microphones so I could hear every desperate breath. They were in the kitchen, pacing like trapped rats. "What are we going to do, Darius?" Tiffany shrieked, her voice bordering on hysteria. "They are going to kill me. You heard him. They are going to break my legs. We have no money," Darius mumbled, staring at the granite countertop. Dad froze the accounts. "The firm fired me. I have nothing." "Think," Tiffany yelled, grabbing him by the shoulders and shaking him. "Think, you idiot? There has to be something. The jewelry is gone. The accounts are locked. What is left?" Darius looked around the kitchen. His eyes roamed over the high-end appliances, the custom cabinetry, the crown molding I had installed by hand 20 years ago. His gaze settled on the insurance papers that were still pinned to the corkboard by the fridge, a policy I had taken out years ago to protect the family asset, a policy with a payout of $2 million in the event of a total loss. "The house," he whispered. "The house is insured." Tiffany stopped shaking him. She looked at the papers, then back at him. Her eyes narrowed, calculating. "It is still in Reggie's name," she said slowly. "But you are the beneficiary of the policy. If the house goes, if it burns to the ground while he is supposedly missing or in the hospital, the payout comes to us." "It is arson," Darius said, his voice trembling. "It is a felony, so is attempted murder," Tiffany countered, her voice dropping to a poisonous hiss. "And we are already facing charges for that. What is one more crime if it saves our lives? We get the money, we pay Varga, we flee the country. It is the only way out, Darius. Burn it down." I listened from the car, my heart turning to stone. I had hoped he would run. I had hoped he would turn himself in. I had hoped for a shred of decency. But desperation is a powerful drug, and my son was an addict. He stood up. "I will do it," he said. "Tonight." Night fell heavy and moonless over the neighborhood. The streetlights hummed, casting long pools of yellow light on the pavement. I sat in the back of the Rolls-Royce Atticus beside me. We were parked 2 houses down, shrouded in shadow. I held a high-definition camera with a telephoto lens in my hands. My fingers were stiff not from age, but from the tension of holding back the urge to run out there and stop him. But I could not stop him. I had to let him do this. I had to let him cross the final line. If I intervened now, I would save the house, but I would lose the justice. He had to choose his fate. At 2 a.m, the side door of the house opened. Darius stepped out. He was dressed in black, wearing a hoodie pulled low over his face. In his hand, he carried a red plastic gasoline can, the one I used for the lawnmower. He moved stealthily, keeping to the shadows of the azalea bushes I had planted for Beatrice on our 10th anniversary. He looked like a thief in his own home. He circled the perimeter, pouring the accelerant along the foundation, splashing it onto the wooden siding of the porch. I watched through this camera lens, zooming in until his face filled the frame. He was crying. Tears were streaming down his cheeks, mixing with the sweat of fear. He was terrified. But he kept pouring. He reached the back deck, the place where we had hosted 4th of July barbecues, where he had learned to grill a burger, where we had sat and watched the sunset 1,000 times. He doused the wooden planks, soaking the memories in gasoline. My hand shook. The camera image wavered. Steady Reggie Atticus whispered, placing a hand on my arm. Let him finish. It felt like I was watching him pour gasoline on my own skin. That house was not just wood and brick. It was the physical manifestation of my love for my family. It was the shelter I had built to keep them safe. And now the boy I had built it for was preparing to turn it into ash. Darius stepped back onto the lawn. He tossed the empty can into the bushes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a book of matches. He struck one. The flame flared bright and sudden in the darkness, a tiny orange star of destruction. He held it up, his hand trembling violently. He looked at the house one last time. For a second, just a second, he hesitated. I held my breath, praying to a God I had not spoken to in years. Drop it, son. Blow it out. Walk away. But the fear of the loan sharks, the poison of his wife, the rot in his soul, it was all too strong. He flicked his wrist. The match tumbled through the air, end over end. It landed on the fuel-soaked wood of the deck. Whoosh! The fire did not start slowly. It erupted. A wall of orange flame shot up the side of the house, devouring the dry wood with a hungry roar. The heat was intense, instantly warping the air. Darius stumbled back, shielded his face from the sudden inferno. He turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness of the neighbor's yard, leaving the home that raised him to burn. I kept filming. I filmed the flames licking at the windows. I filmed the siding curling and blackening. I filmed the destruction of my past. Tears finally spilled over my cheeks, hot and bitter. I did not call the fire department. I did not need to. I had installed a state-of-the-art silent alarm system connected directly to the station 3 blocks away. Within minutes, the wail of sirens pierced the night. The red lights flashed against the trees. The firefighters arrived, hoses dragging, water blasting, fighting to save the structure. But the damage was done. Not to the house, which could be repaired, but to the bond between father and son. That was incinerated. It was ash. I lowered the camera. I had the footage. I had the proof of a felony that carried a 20-year sentence. Let us go, Atticus, I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from a grave. I have seen enough. As we drove away, illuminated by the flickering light of the fire, I felt a part of me die. The father was gone. Only the judge remained. And the sentence would be severe. The fire was out before the sun even rose. My state-of-the-art suppression system, combined with the rapid response of the fire department, meant that Darius had failed at arson just as he had failed at everything else in his life. The house was scorched, the siding blackened, and the porch destroyed, but the structure stood firm. It was a testament to my engineering and a monument to his incompetence. I watched from the shadows as the police cuffed him. He did not fight. He wept like a child, broken and terrified. But just as they were shoving him into the back of the cruiser, a silver BMW screeched to a halt. Tiffany jumped out. She did not run to her husband. She ran to the nearest news camera crew that had arrived to cover the blaze in the historic district. She was a vision of calculated distress. Her hair was perfectly messy, her makeup smeared just enough to suggest tragedy. She grabbed the microphone from a startled reporter and launched the most impressive performance of her life. "Please, help us," she screamed into the lens, her voice cracking with practiced emotion. "My husband is not a criminal. He is a victim. We are victims of a tyrant. His father, Reginald King, is a monster who has financially abused us for years. He cut us off because I am white, because he hates our marriage, because he wants to control every breath we take." Darius was desperate. He just wanted to be free. It was a narrative masterpiece. In 30 seconds, she had flipped the script. She took a case of clear-cut felony arson and turned it into a story of racial tension and generational trauma. She played the victim card, the race card, and the poverty card all at once, and the world bought it. By noon, Darius was out on bail. Tiffany had likely sold her engagement ring or found a predatory bail bondsman willing to take a risk on a high-profile case. They walked out of the precinct hand in hand, flashing determined smiles at the paparazzi. They looked like freedom fighters, not felons. I sat in the safe house watching the news cycle spin out of control. The headlines were nauseating. Structural engineer empire built on son's suffering. Is Reginald King the meanest man in Chicago? The internet detectives dug up old photos of me looking stern at job sites and contrasted them with photos of Darius and Tiffany smiling at charity events. They painted me as the villain, a wealthy hoarder sitting on millions while his son starved. By evening, the protests started. They did not find the safe house, thank God, but they found the main house, the one that was still smelling of smoke. A crowd gathered on the lawn holding signs that read "Justice for Darius" and "Stop Financial Abuse." They threw eggs at the blackened siding. They chanted my name with venom. Beatrice saw it on the television before I could turn it off. She saw the angry faces, the fire trucks, the picture of her son looking battered and sad. "Why do they hate us, Reggie?" she asked, her voice trembling. Her hands shook so badly she spilled her tea. "Did we do something wrong? Is Darius hurt?" Seeing her fear broke something inside me that I didn't know was still intact. I had built a fortune to protect her. I had fought wars to keep her safe. And now my own son had weaponized the public to terrorize her in her final years. I turned off the TV. I walked over to her and knelt down, taking her hands in mine. "We did nothing wrong, B," I said, my voice steady. "Darius is lost, but I'm going to fix it." I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the city skyline, a skyline I had helped build. I realized then that I couldn't win this in the shadows. Atticus's legal maneuvers were brilliant, but they were too slow. The court of public opinion moved at the speed of light, and I was losing. If I stayed silent, I was guilty. If I fought back with lawyers, I was a bully. I needed to change the game. I needed to give them exactly what they claimed they wanted. I picked up the phone and called Atticus. "Stop the lawsuits," I said. What? Atticus sputtered on the other end. "Reggie, we have them on the ropes. The arson evidence is irrefutable." "It does not matter," I said. "The jury pool is being poisoned right now. If we go to trial next month, half the city will be rooting for Darius to get away with it. They see a poor boy fighting a rich father. We need to kill the narrative." "How do you propose we do that?" Atticus asked. "We give them a show," I said. "Tiffany wants the spotlight. Darius wants the money. The public wants a climax. Let us give it to them. I want you to book the grand ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton for this Saturday night. Send out press releases to every major news outlet. Invite the mayor, invite the protesters, and send a personal invitation to Darius and Tiffany." "Reggie." "What are you planning?" Atticus asked, his voice low with warning. "Tell them I am stepping down," I said. "Tell them the fire was a wake-up call. Tell them I have seen the error of my ways and I am ready to reconcile. Tell them I am going to sign over the entire King estate, the company, the patents, the properties to my son, live on television." There was a long silence on the line. Atticus knew me. He knew I would sooner burn my money than give it to the people who abused my wife. He knew this was not a surrender. It was a trap. "It is a high-wire act," Reggie Atticus finally said. "If this goes sideways, you lose everything." "I have already lost my son," I replied. "All I have left is my dignity and my wife's peace of mind." "Book the room, Atticus." I hung up the phone. The plan was in motion. I was going to invite the vultures to a feast. I was going to let them put on their finest clothes and stand in front of the cameras thinking they had won. I was going to let Tiffany gloat. I was going to let Darius play the forgiving son, and then when the whole world was watching, I was going to drop the blade. I looked at Beatrice, who was now humming a hymn softly to herself, rocking back and forth. "Don't worry, baby," I whispered. "The king is going to hold court one last time, and Judgment Day is coming." The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton was a cavern of crystal and gold designed to make kings feel at home and paupers feel small. I stood behind the heavy velvet curtains of the stage, watching the monitor that displayed the main entrance. It was a circus out there. The press had turned out in force, hungry for the finale of the family drama that had captivated the city for a week. They wanted to see the tyrant father bend the knee. They wanted to see the prodigal son return in triumph. And there they were. A black limousine pulled up to the curb. It was likely rented on credit, or perhaps paid for by a tabloid, in exchange for exclusive rights to the victory party. The door opened and Darius stepped out. He was transformed. Gone was the sweaty, terrified arsonist who had poured gasoline on his childhood home just days ago. In his place was a martyr in a navy blue suit. He looked somber, dignified, and tragically misunderstood. He reached back into the car and helped Tiffany out. She was wearing white, Of course she was. A modest white dress that suggested purity and innocence, a stark contrast to the venom I knew ran through her veins. She clung to his arm, looking fragile, looking brave. They walked the red carpet like royalty returning from exile. The flashbulbs exploded, blinding white lightning in the night. Reporters thrust microphones into their faces, shouting questions. Darius held up a hand, a gesture of magnanimous restraint. "Please," he said, his voice projected perfectly for the cameras. "We are just here to heal. My father has finally agreed to do the right thing. We just want to be a family again." Tiffany dabbed at a dry eye with a tissue. "We forgive him," she whispered loud enough for 3 news crews to pick up. "Dementia is a terrible disease. We know he was not himself when he froze our accounts. We are just glad he is getting the help he needs and that the estate will be in capable hands." I watched from the darkness, my hands clasped behind my back. It was a masterclass in manipulation. They were walking into the lion's den convinced they were the ones holding the whip. They entered the ballroom and the crowd parted. I had invited everyone. The board members who had fired Darius, the bankers who had denied his loans, the neighbors who had witnessed the fire, even a few of the protesters who had thrown eggs at my house. I wanted witnesses. I wanted the entire city to see exactly who my son was. Darius and Tiffany moved through the room, shaking hands, accepting condolences for their suffering. They looked at the buffet tables laden with lobster and caviar. They looked at the open bar. They looked at the stage where a single podium stood waiting. I saw the greed flare in their eyes. They were already spending the money. They were already remodeling the beach house. They scanned the room, looking for the lawyers, looking for the papers that would sign over my life's work to them. Atticus stood by the stage stairs, stone-faced and silent. Darius approached him with a smug grin. "Where is the old man? More." Darius asked loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "Is he ready to sign?" "Mr. King will address the guests shortly," Atticus replied, not engaging. "Make sure the notary is ready," Tiffany added, her voice sharp beneath the veneer of sweetness. "We do not want this to drag on. We have been through enough trauma." They took their seats at the front table, the table reserved for the guests of honor. They sat down like monarchs. Darius put his arm around the back of Tiffany's chair. They whispered to each other, likely laughing at how easy it had been to break me. They thought I had crumbled under the pressure of the bad press. They thought I was terrified of losing my reputation. They did not know that a man who has nothing left to lose is the most dangerous man in the world. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. The murmur of the crowd died down, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. A single spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the podium. It was time. I walked out from behind the curtain. I moved slowly, leaning heavily on a cane I did not really need. I wore a black suit, old-fashioned but impeccably tailored. I wanted to look like the past. I wanted to look like history. I stepped into the spotlight. I blinked against the glare. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw the reporters with their cameras rolling. I saw the board members looking skeptical. And right in the front row, I saw Darius and Tiffany. They were leaning forward, eyes wide, hungry. They were waiting for the surrender. I gripped the sides of the podium. My hands were steady. "Good evening," I said. My voice was gravel and steel, amplified by the speakers until it filled every corner of the room. "Thank you all for coming." I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. "Many of you know me as Reginald King, the engineer," I continued. "You know me as the man who built the skyline of this city. You know my steel and my concrete. But for the last week, you have come to know me as something else. A father." Darius nodded solemnly, playing the part of the grieving son. I looked directly at him. Our eyes locked. "I stand here tonight to admit a hard truth," I said, my voice dropping to a register of profound sadness. "A truth that no father ever wants to speak aloud. I have failed." A gasp went through the room. Tiffany squeezed Darius's hand triumphantly. This was it, the confession, the abdication. "I failed in my most important duty," I continued. "I spent 40 years building structures that could withstand earthquakes and hurricanes. I calculated loads and stresses. I reinforced foundations. But while I was building towers, I neglected the foundation of my own home. I looked at the papers sitting on the small table next to the podium. The transfer documents. "My son Darius believes that he is entitled to my legacy," I said. "He believes that because he carries my name, he deserves my fortune. And for a long time I thought so too. I thought that giving him everything would make him a man. I paid for his degrees. I funded his lifestyle. I bailed him out of every mistake. Darius's smile faltered slightly. This was not the script he had expected. He shifted in his seat. But I was wrong, I said, my voice rising, gaining power. I did not raise a man, I raised a parasite. The room went dead silent. The air was sucked out of the ballroom. Tiffany's smile vanished, replaced by a look of sharp confusion. And tonight, I continued, relentless now, tonight I am here to correct that mistake. You all came here to see a transfer of power. You came here to see Reginald King sign over his empire to his son to stop the protests to save his reputation. I picked up the thick stack of legal documents from the table. I held them up in the spotlight. Darius stood up halfway, his face pale. "Dad, what are you doing?" "Sit down, Darius," I commanded. The voice was not the voice of an old man. It was the voice of the king. "I am not signing these papers over to you," I said, "because there is nothing left to sign over." I ripped the documents in half. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. I threw the pieces into the air. They fluttered down like snow, landing on Darius's expensive shoes. Darius looked at the paper scraps, then at me, his face contorted in a mask of pure horror. "What did you do?" he screamed. I leaned into the microphone. "I sold it," I said. "I sold it all. The company, the patents, the land, the house you tried to burn down. I sold everything 3 days ago while you were busy giving interviews to the press." The crowd erupted. The reporters began shouting questions. Flashbulbs went off like a strobe light. Darius scrambled over the table, knocking over glasses and floral arrangements. "You are lying!" he shrieked, his voice high and hysterical. "You cannot sell it. It is my inheritance." "It was never yours," I said calmly. "It was mine. And now it belongs to the Beatrice King Foundation for the Protection of the Elderly." I pointed to the large screen behind me. "And if you want to know why, Darius, if you want to know why I left you with nothing, look at the screen." I pressed the button on the remote. The image on the screen flickered to life. It was not a chart of assets, it was a video file. Grainy, high-contrast, black and white footage from a hospital room, and the audio began to play. "Pull the plug, Darius. We need the insurance money." The voice of Tiffany filled the ballroom, echoing off the crystal chandeliers, stripping them naked before the entire world. The feast of the vultures was over. The slaughter had begun. The audio of Tiffany's voice demanding that my life support be terminated hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of 1,000 people holding their breath at once. Darius stood frozen near the stage, his face a mask of pale shock as the words echoed back to him. "Pull the plug. We need the money." But the show was not over. I pressed the button on the remote again and the screen behind me shifted. The grainy black and white footage was replaced by high-definition color video. It was night. The camera angle was high, looking down from a neighbor's roofline. In the center of the frame stood a man in a black hoodie. He looked small and desperate in the dark, but when he turned his face toward the light of the street lamp, there was no mistaking who it was. It was Darius. He was holding a red gas can. The crowd gasped, a collective sound of horror that rippled through the ballroom. On the screen, my son began to pour gasoline onto the porch of the home he had grown up in. He splashed it over the threshold. He soaked the wooden siding. The video was crisp, clear, and damning. It showed him striking the match. It showed the orange bloom of the fire reflecting in his terrified eyes. It showed him running away into the night, leaving his childhood home to burn. I saw the reporters in the room turning their cameras away from me and pointing them directly at Darius. The flashbulbs that had celebrated him minutes ago were now interrogating him. He looked around wild-eyed, seeking an escape, but he was trapped in the glare of his own crime. Then the video changed one last time. This footage was from inside the safe house, taken from the hidden camera in the doorbell before I let them in to execute their kidnapping plan. It showed Tiffany standing on the porch fixing her hair while Darius paced nervously. The audio was crystal clear. "I hate this," she spat on the recording, her face twisted in a sneer that the cameras in the ballroom picked up in terrifying detail. "I hate pretending to care about that old man. And his wife. God, she is useless. Just a senile old black woman taking up space. Once we get the power of attorney signed, I am dumping her in the cheapest facility I can find. If she dies in a week, it will be a blessing. It saves us money on the monthly fees." The gasp in the room turned into a roar. The racial slur, combined with the cruelty toward a sick elderly woman, broke the spell Tiffany had cast over the city. The protesters who had gathered outside to support the young couple were now watching the live feed on their phones, and I could hear the tone of the crowd outside shifting from support to fury. Tiffany put her hands over her ears as if she could block out her own voice, but the speakers were relentless, amplifying her hatred until it filled every corner of the room. She looked at the screen, then at the crowd, and she saw her social standing incinerating faster than my house had. I stepped back to the podium. I did not need to shout. The microphone caught my low, gravelly voice and carried it over the murmurs of the crowd. "You wanted a show," I said, looking down at my son and his wife, who were now huddled together like shipwreck survivors on a raft. "You wanted the world to see who Reginald King really was. Well, here I am, and there you are." Darius looked up at me. His eyes were red-rimmed and wet. "Dad," he choked out, his voice barely audible. "Dad, please, turn it off." I ignored him. I picked up a single piece of paper from the podium. It was a bank confirmation slip. For the last week, I continued addressing the room my family has claimed that I am a hoarder, that I am a tyrant sitting on a fortune while they starve. They claimed they needed to burn my house down to survive. They claimed they needed to commit me to a nursing home to save me from myself. I held up the paper. They were right about one thing. I was sitting on a fortune. My patents, my real estate holdings, my stock portfolio. It was worth approximately $15 million. The number hung in the air. 15 million. Greed flickered across the faces of the guests, even in the midst of the horror. Darius's head snapped up. He looked at the paper as if it were a holy relic. "But you were wrong about the rest," I said, my voice hardening. "You are not my heirs. You are my mistakes." I paused, letting the weight of the judgment settle. 3 days ago, while you were busy giving interviews and playing the victim, I was busy doing business. I liquidated everything. I sold the land. I sold the patent rights to a tech firm in Tokyo. I sold the shell companies. Darius stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "You cannot do that!" he shouted, desperation making him bold. "That is family money. It is in the trust." "It was an irrevocable trust," I corrected him calmly, "and I revoked it." I pointed to the screen again. A new image appeared. It was a logo, a simple, elegant design featuring a silhouette of my wife, the Beatrice King Foundation. 3 days ago at 9 in the morning, the wire transfer cleared, I said. Every single penny. All $15 million. It has been donated irrevocably to the Beatrice King Foundation. Its mission is to provide legal aid and safe housing for the elderly victims of financial abuse. The room erupted. It was chaos. Reporters were shouting questions into their phones. The board members were whispering furiously, but Darius and Tiffany were silent. They stood there stripped of everything. The money they had killed for. The money they had burned a house for. The money they had destroyed their souls for. It was gone. It was not frozen. It was not hidden. It was gone forever, used to fight people exactly like them. "You gave it away," Tiffany shrieked, her voice piercing the din. "You gave away our money to charity. You crazy old bat. You stole our future." "I did not steal your future," I replied. "I just refused to pay for it. You are young. You are healthy. You have hands. Go work for a living like I did." Darius looked at me with a hatred so pure it was almost blinding. The mask of the grieving son was gone completely. In its place was the face of a stranger, a man consumed by entitlement and rage. He realized then that there was no coming back. There was no reconciliation. There was no check coming in the mail. He was broke, he was exposed, and he was cornered. He let out a guttural roar, a sound of pure animal frustration. He grabbed a steak knife from the table. It was a silver knife, heavy and sharp, meant for cutting prime rib. "I am going to kill you," he screamed, lunging toward the stage. The crowd screamed and scrambled back, knocking over chairs and drinks. Darius vaulted over the head table, his eyes locked on my throat. He moved with the speed of a man who has nothing left to lose. Tiffany did not stop him. She watched, her eyes wide and gleaming, hoping he would finish the job, hoping that if I died right now, maybe, just maybe, there was a legal loophole she could exploit. I did not move. I did not flinch. I stood my ground, leaning on my cane, watching my son charge at me with murder in his eyes. He made it to the bottom of the stairs. "Freeze! Police!" The command boomed from the side of the room, but Darius did not freeze. He was too far gone. He put a foot on the first step, raising the knife. A body slammed into him from the side. It was one of the private security guards I had hired, massive men who used to be linebackers. He hit Darius with the force of a freight train. Darius flew sideways, crashing into a table of champagne flutes. Glass shattered everywhere. The knife skittered across the floor, spinning until it stopped at the feet of Atticus Moore. Before Darius could scramble up, 3 uniformed police officers were on top of him. They pinned him to the ground, his face pressed into the broken glass and the wine-stained carpet. "Get off me!" he screamed, thrashing against the weight of the law. "He is the thief. Arrest him. He stole my life." Darius King, an officer said, clicking the handcuffs onto his wrists tight enough to bruise. "You are under arrest for the attempted murder of Reginald King, felony arson, and conspiracy to commit fraud. You have the right to remain silent. I advise you to use it," Atticus said, stepping forward and looking down at him. "Though I suspect it is too late for that." Across the room, another team of officers was moving in on Tiffany. She tried to blend into the crowd, tried to slip away toward the exit, but there was nowhere to go. An officer grabbed her arm. "Tiffany King, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, conspiracy, and elder abuse." "No," she yelled, pulling away, her composure finally shattering completely. "It was not me. It was him. Darius made me do it. He is the violent one. Look at him. I am a victim here. I am just a wife." The officer spun her around and cuffed her, ignoring her protests. The guests watched in stunned silence as the golden couple, the martyrs of the week, were dragged out of the ballroom in chains. Darius lifted his head as they hauled him up. Blood was trickling down his forehead from where he had hit the floor. He looked at me one last time. "I hate you," he spat. "I wish you had died in that coma." I looked down at him from the height of the stage. I felt no anger anymore, only a deep, hollow sadness. "I know, son," I said softly into the microphone. "And that is why you lost." The police dragged him out. The heavy doors swung shut behind them, cutting off his screams. The ballroom was quiet again, save for the murmurs of the shocked crowd and the clicking of cameras. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw judgment. I saw awe. I saw fear. They knew now. They knew that Reginald King was not a man to be trifled with. They knew that I would burn my own kingdom to the ground before I let a usurper take it. I looked at Atticus. He nodded once, a slow, solemn gesture of respect. I turned to the microphone one last time. "The bar is open," I said. "Enjoy the evening. I am going home to my wife." I turned and walked off the stage, my cane tapping a steady rhythm on the floor. I did not look back. The performance was over. The lesson was taught. The king had defended his throne, but the castle was empty, and the victory tasted like ash. The Cook County Jail was a far cry from the luxury suites Darius was accustomed to. It was a world of gray concrete and steel bars that smelled of sweat and fear. My lawyer Atticus had given me the report. Darius had been inside for 3 days, and he was already broken. His face was swollen from a beating he had received in the holding cell, a welcome gift from the general population who did not take kindly to a man who burned down his own father's house. He sat on the edge of his bunk, huddled in the corner of the 6x8 cell, trying to make himself as small as possible. He was terrified. He knew that the loan sharks he owed money to had reach even inside these walls. He spent every waking moment watching the door, waiting for the hitman, waiting for the shank that would end his miserable life. But death did not come through the cell door. A guard did. He was a heavy-set man with a ring of keys that jingled like funeral bells. King the guard grunted, "Mail call." He tossed a large manila envelope onto the thin mattress. It landed with a heavy thud. Darius stared at it. He flinched as if the paper might bite him. He expected divorce papers from Tiffany, who was being held in the women's wing. He expected a foreclosure notice. He expected a death threat from Varga the loan shark. With trembling hands, he reached out and picked it up. It was heavy. There was no return address, just his name scrawled in a handwriting he knew better than his own. My handwriting. He tore open the seal. He reached inside and pulled out the contents. It was not a legal summons. It was not a check. It was a stack of paper yellowed with age and smelling of the cedar chest where I had kept them for 25 years. They were drawings. Darius froze. His breath caught in his throat. He looked down at the top sheet. It was a drawing done in crayon of a skyscraper that reached all the way to a blue sun. The lines were crooked and the perspective was all wrong, but the passion was there. At the bottom, in clumsy block letters, it read, "The King Tower by Darius, age 10. He shuffled through them. There was a drawing of a bridge, a drawing of a house with a tire swing, a drawing of me and him wearing yellow hard hats, holding hands on a construction site. These were the artifacts of his innocence. They were the dreams he had before the greed took root, before the entitlement rotted his soul. He had wanted to be a builder. He had wanted to create things, not destroy them. He had wanted to be like me. He traced the wax lines of the crayon with his bruised thumb. A sob escaped his throat, a raw, jagged sound. He remembered drawing these at the kitchen table while I reviewed blueprints. He remembered me pinning them to the fridge as if they were masterpieces. He remembered the pride in my eyes. Underneath the stack of drawings was a single white envelope. It was sealed with wax. He opened it. Inside was a letter on my personal stationery. Darius began to read. I was not there, but I knew exactly what the words would do to him. I had written them with the same precision I used to calculate the load-bearing capacity of a bridge. I needed to break him down so he could be rebuilt. Darius, you are sitting in a cage because you built a prison for yourself out of lies and greed. You look at these drawings and you see the boy you used to be. I look at them and I see the son I lost. You wanted my money, Darius. You wanted the finished product without doing the work. You wanted the view from the top of the mountain without climbing the trail. You are scared right now. I know you are. You are looking over your shoulder waiting for Varga's men to come for you. You owe them $100,000. In prison, that kind of debt is a death sentence. You think you are going to die in there. Darius stopped reading. His hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled. He looked at the cell door expecting the assassin to walk in at any moment. He read on. But you are not going to die, Darius, not by their hands. I paid them. Darius gasped. He read the line again. I paid them. Yesterday morning, before I finalized the donation to the foundation, I made one last withdrawal. I withdrew $100,000 of my personal liquid cash. I met with Mr. Varga's associate. I bought your debt. It is paid in full. The sharks are gone. You are safe from them. Darius slumped against the cinder block wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. He clutched the letter to his chest. His father, the man he had tried to kill, had just saved his life. I had walked into the underworld and bought his safety. The relief washed over him like a tidal wave, leaving him weak and gasping for air. He was not going to die. I had saved him. He looked back at the letter, expecting to read that I would bail him out next, that I would hire the best defense attorneys, that I would fix this just like I had fixed everything else in his life. He was wrong. I saved your life. Darius. The letter continued, because you are my son, and I could not let you be slaughtered like an animal. I gave you the gift of life one last time. But that is all I am giving you. I will not pay for your lawyer. I will not pay your bail. I will not come to visit you. I saved your body, but I cannot save your soul. You have to do that yourself. You are going to prison, Darius. You are going to serve your time. You are going to lose your license, your reputation, and your freedom. And while you are in there, you are going to look at those drawings. You are going to remember the boy who wanted to build things. I cleared the path for you to survive, but you have to walk it alone. Do not call me. Do not write to me. When you get out in 10 or 15 years, if you have become a man who can look me in the eye, then maybe we can talk. But until then, you are on your own. This is my final gift to you. The opportunity to hit rock bottom without dying. Build something from the ashes, son, or stay in them. The choice is finally yours. Reginald King. Darius let out a wail that echoed through the cell block. It was a sound of pure heartbreak. He curled into a ball on the concrete floor, clutching the drawings and the letter. He cried for the father he had betrayed. He cried for the wife who had led him astray. He cried for the wasted years and the lost opportunities. For the first time in his life, he was truly accountable. There was no safety net. There was no checkbook. There was only the cold, hard reality of his actions. I had given him the hardest love a father can give. I had let him fall, but I had placed a mattress at the bottom of the pit so the impact wouldn't kill him. He looked at the drawing of the tower reaching for the sun. He traced the words Darius, age 10. The boy who drew that was gone. But maybe, just maybe, the man who held it could find him again. I sat in the safe house miles away, feeling a phantom pain in my chest. I knew he was reading it. I knew he was crying. It hurt me to do it. It hurt to be the judge and the executioner of my own child. But it was necessary. I had saved his life. Now he had to save himself. The war against my son was over, but the skirmish with his wife required one final tactical strike. Tiffany was out on bail pending her federal trial, sitting in her parents' basement trying to spin her narrative on social media. She was painting herself as a battered wife, a victim of the King family patriarchy. She thought she could still win in the court of public opinion, even if she lost in the court of law. She was wrong. I did not just want her in prison, I wanted her dismantled. I wanted to ensure that she could never prey on another family again. I sat in Atticus's office, the mahogany desk covered in paperwork. We were filing a civil suit for defamation, character assassination, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. But the real weapon was not the lawsuit itself, it was the evidence attached to it. We sent a complete dossier to the State Real Estate Commission. It contained the video of her abusing Beatrice, the audio of her plotting fraud, and the police report regarding the arson conspiracy. The result was immediate and catastrophic. 2 days later, the notification came through. The board had convened an emergency session. Tiffany's real estate license was revoked permanently. She was blacklisted. The career she had built on false smiles and ruthless ambition was vaporized. But I did not stop there. Atticus leaked the revocation to the industry blogs. Within hours, she was toxic. Her agency fired her publicly to distance themselves from the scandal. Her friends, the social climbers she desperately tried to impress, blocked her number. I watched her meltdown from a distance. She posted a video crying, screaming about injustice, but the comments section was a firing squad. The public had seen the footage of her mocking my wife. There was no sympathy left. She was isolated, unemployable, and facing federal prison. She had wanted my house. Now she would be lucky to find a landlord willing to rent her a studio apartment. I signed the final legal documents with a steady hand, closing the book on Tiffany King. She was no longer my problem. She was a ghost haunting a life she used to have. With the enemies vanquished, it was time to leave the battlefield. We did not pack much. 2 suitcases. That was it. That was what 40 years of building an empire came down to. I looked at the mounds of clothes, the furniture, the trinkets accumulated over a lifetime, and I felt nothing but exhaustion. I left it all. I told Atticus to donate whatever was useful and trash the rest. I did not want the physical weight of this city dragging me down anymore. The morning of our departure was gray and rainy, a fitting eulogy for the life I was leaving behind. There was no farewell party. There were no tearful goodbyes with neighbors. The neighbors were the same people who had watched the news and judged me before they knew the truth. I did not owe them a wave. I helped Beatrice into her coat. She looked small and fragile, but there was a clarity in her eyes I had not seen in weeks. The stress of the house, the tension of the family conflict, it had all been feeding her confusion. Now in the quiet, she seemed to breathe easier. "Where are we going, Reggie?" she asked, buttoning her coat with trembling fingers. "We are going on a trip, Bea," I said softly. "A long trip. To a place where the sun shines and nobody knows our names." I led her out to the waiting car. It was not a limousine. It was a simple rideshare. The driver did not know he was transporting a multimillionaire and his wife. He just saw 2 old black folks with 2 small suitcases leaving a nondescript apartment building. We drove to the airport in silence, watching the city of Chicago slide past the window. I saw the skyscrapers. I had helped design the bridges. I had reinforced the skyline that bore my invisible fingerprint. I had given my blood and sweat to this country. I had built its foundations. And in return, it had given me a son who wanted me dead and a system that almost let him get away with it. I felt a profound sense of detachment. I was not angry anymore. I was just done. America was the land of opportunity, but for me, it had become a graveyard of dreams. I was ready to be reborn. At the airport, we moved through the terminal like ghosts. We boarded the plane, settling into our seats. As the engines roared to life and the wheels lifted off the tarmac, I looked down at the sprawling city one last time. Somewhere down there, my son was sitting in a cell staring at his childhood drawings. Somewhere down there, his wife was staring at a ruin of her own making. I turned away from the window. I took Beatrice's hand. She smiled at me, a genuine warm smile that lit up the cabin. "Are we flying?" she asked, delighted like a child. "Yes, baby," I said. "We are flying." We were leaving the pain, the betrayal, and the winter behind. We were heading toward the equator, toward Ghana, toward the home I had built in secret. We were heading toward peace. And for the first time in a long time, I felt lighter than air. The sun over the Gulf of Guinea was different from the sun in Chicago. It did not judge. It just warmed. We had been here for a year now, living in a villa perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean, a stark contrast to the metaphorical cliff my son had tried to push us off. Here the air smelled of salt and hibiscus, not exhaust and betrayal. The only noise was the rhythmic crashing of the waves against the rocks below and the rustle of the wind through the palm trees. I sat on the veranda watching Beatrice. She was sitting in a wide wicker chair wearing a dress made of bright local fabric, vibrant yellows and blues that complemented her skin. She looked 10 years younger. The tension that had etched deep lines into her face back in the States, the constant underlying fear of the nursing home, the confusion exacerbated by Tiffany's cruelty, it had all melted away in the tropical heat. She was humming a song, a gospel tune she used to sing in the choir 40 years ago. She stopped humming and turned to look at me. Her eyes were clear, sharp, and focused. For months she had called me sir, or simply him, struggling to place my face in the fragmented library of her memory. Today she looked right at me and smiled a smile that reached her eyes. "Reginald," she said, soft and sweet. "Reginald King. My husband." I froze my coffee cup halfway to my mouth. It was the first time she had said my full name in 2 years. The doctors in Chicago had said her decline was irreversible, but the doctors here said that peace was the best medicine. I walked over and kissed her forehead, my hand trembling slightly. "I am here, baby," I whispered. "I am right here." "You built this house," she said, looking out at the horizon. "It is strong, like you." I swallowed the lump in my throat. I had built skyscrapers that touched the clouds, but this single moment of recognition was the greatest structural achievement of my life. I had saved her. I had pulled her out of the fire and brought her to a place where she could heal. My phone buzzed on the table, shattering the moment. It was a satellite phone, the only link to the world I had left behind. I picked it up. A notification flashed on the screen from a bank in the Cayman Islands. Quarterly dividend payment received. The amount was 6 figures. I smiled a small private smile. Darius and Tiffany thought I had given everything away. They thought I had donated every last cent to the foundation, leaving myself destitute. They forgot that a man who builds bridges always keeps a toll booth for himself. I had retained a minority stake in a few key international patents. I was still wealthy, I always would be. But looking at the numbers on the screen, I realized they meant nothing to me. They were just pixels. They were just scorekeeping for a game I was no longer playing. The money could not buy the clarity in Beatrice's eyes. It could not buy the ocean breeze. It could not buy the peace that settled in my chest. I looked at the phone one last time. I thought about checking the news to see if Darius had been sentenced yet. I thought about checking the foundation's progress. Then I looked at the ocean. I stood up and walked to the edge of the terrace. Below me, the Atlantic churned turquoise and white. I pulled my arm back and threw the device. It spun through the air, gleaming in the African sun before splashing into the water below. It sank instantly, taking the bank alerts, the news updates, and the memories of my ungrateful son with it to the bottom of the sea. I sat back down beside my wife. I took her hand in mine. Far away in a cold gray cell in Illinois, Darius was waking up to steel bars and regret. He was living in the past, trapped in the consequences of his greed. He had wanted my life. Instead, he gave me a new one. People say revenge is a dish best served cold. They are wrong. The greatest revenge is not destroying your enemy. It is healing yourself. It is living a life so full, so complete, and so happy that they no longer exist in your world. I had lost a son, but I had found myself. I closed my eyes, listening to the ocean and the steady breathing of the woman I loved. The king had retired, and for the first time in 71 years, I was finally free. My journey taught me a painful but necessary lesson. Blood does not guarantee loyalty. For years, I built skyscrapers to withstand the fiercest storms, yet I failed to see the rot of entitlement within my own home. True strength isn't about the wealth you accumulate, but the courage to walk away from those who view you as nothing more than a resource. You cannot buy respect, and sometimes the greatest act of love is allowing people to face the cold consequences of their own greed. Peace is the only luxury truly worth fighting for, and it is never too late to reclaim it. If you believe justice was served today, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of truth and redemption. I want to hear from you in the comments. Would you have given Darius a second chance, or did he get exactly what he deserved?